Giga Wing is a bit of an odd game. It looks like a proper bullet hell, and in terms of density of patterns, it most certainly is a proper bullet hell, but it plays a bit differently from most games in that genre due to a single mechanic that will most likely decide almost entirely on its own how you end up feeling about the game overall. Namely, the ability to cover yourself in a kind of force field and reflect bullets. Now personally, I love this mechanic and the way it changes how you play, and therefore, I love this game. But while there is other stuff going on in this title, in a similar way to the polarity switching in Ikaruga, if that mechanic is not for you, then the game is probably not for you either. Now since it's such a central part of the game, we may as well just look at it straight off the bat. The way it works is you hold down the shot button for about a second to charge up the gauge in the bottom left of the screen. Your reflect field will then activate, and for about 2 seconds you'll not just be invincible, but will also have the ability to bounce enemy shots back at them to inflict added damage. When your 2 seconds are up, your gauge will be crossed out until it can cool down, which takes about 5 seconds. All of those timings are pretty short, and unlike a bomb mechanic, there is no stock of reflect fields. You can engage it as many times as you like and it will never run out. This means two things. One, you will probably use your reflect field close to 100 times in a single run, and two, at any point in Giga Wing, you only ever have to survive for the next 5 seconds to be able to get yourself out of trouble, and you won't be wasting any resources by doing so. Of course, in the later stages especially, 5 seconds can seem an incredibly long time, but it always feels doable. And for that reason, I think Giga Wing is a great shmup for anyone looking to get into the bullet hell side of things. This also makes Giga Wing a somewhat aggressive game. Instead of spending tense minutes inching yourself tap by tap through crowded patterns, you can activate your reflect field, fly right up into the face of whatever enemy is spewing forth some swirling torrent of bullets, then slip back to take up an advantageous position, and it'll only be another 5 seconds before you can do that all again. On top of these more prosaic advantages of the effect, almost equally important for me is just how incredibly satisfying it feels to plow right into the heart of an impossible looking pattern and slam all those bullets back where they came from while your force field crackles away. Of course, it's not quite as simple as just activating reflect as soon as possible every time it cools down. Do it at the wrong moment and you could find yourself reflecting back just a scant smattering of bullets, with enemies or bosses then taking the opportunity to unleash their densest patterns just as your invulnerability runs out. However, it's also not an ability to sit on and save only for getting yourself out of trouble. You will want to use the reflect whenever there's a good opportunity, both because it damages enemies and also because it's important for scoring points. Enemies drop medals all over the place, and using reflect can generate even more. Scooping these medals up is the way to score big. And score big you certainly shall, because with the points per medal being cumulative, it doesn't take long before the numbers start hitting heights where you don't even know what they're called anymore. Fortunately you won't have to, because your score is helpfully color-coded, allowing you to easily keep track of how well or badly you're doing. Now, other than the reflect force, you do of course have regular shot and a stock of bombs. Both of these are quite different for each of the 4 pilots in the game, with a purple spread shot, a powerful orange narrow shot, blue homing missiles, and, well, I'm not quite sure what the green shit fires, but they explode at medium range with a kind of electrical burst. Shots need leveled up by collecting the floating P icons that drop from some enemies, and it will usually take all of the first stage and maybe slightly into the second before you max it out. The shot differences all mix up play quite seriously, but while the bombs are all different visually, they're basically all just screen clearing and won't affect your game in any really major way. On top of their different weapons, the 4 characters all have their own plot lines to follow. The main story centres around some magical medallion and a war over its incredible power, and to be honest is in the who cares category. Fortunately, all the little monologues can be skipped easily. Despite the fantastical medallion taking centre stage, a lot of the designs in Giga Wing are actually quite militaristic. You're fighting planes and trains and tanks through most of a lot of the stages, although there are more unusual or futuristic designs scattered about here and there too, with industrial yards and military bases serving as your backdrops. However, the game never feels remotely realistic due to the oversaturated colour palette that will make you feel like you're having your eyeballs kicked around a sweet shop by a pair of psychotic Oompa Loompas. That's not an experience that's going to be to everyone's tastes, I'm sure, But for me, the pop and fizz of the colours give Giga Wing's visuals a really captivating allure that creates a constant sense of exhilaration. As often as not, this comes from the bullets themselves, and the colours are really necessary, as without them, the stage and enemy designs wouldn't have too much to make them stand out. That is early doors at least. Once you get to the later stages, you do find some more unusual designs, with floating islands and Inca-like buildings, but this only really serves to give the visuals a somewhat disjointed feeling with what's gone before. Not that it matters too much, because the screen is going to be so flooded with multicoloured bullets, you're not going to have much chance to be thinking about their lack of continuity. When it comes to music and sound, Giga Wing is unspectacular. The effects do a good job of communicating your reflect status, and you'll quickly find you don't even have to look at the gauge to judge how you're doing, but some other noises can become a little grating, and the music is unmemorable at best. I've seen quite a few different numbers given for the stage count in Giga Wing, and I think this depends on whether you count boss fights as stages or not. I would say Giga Wing has 5 main stages, which play in different orders depending on your chosen character, followed by a boss stage, and if you can defeat that guy without continuing, another boss stage on top of that. I like having that extra content to aim for, but since this is available on Switch through the Capcom Arcade Collection, the rewind feature ought to help anyone curious about seeing the last boss and subsequent good endings. I covered the Capcom Arcade Stadium release in another video, but just to quickly rehash the features you'll find if you play it this way, we have rewind, we have save states, we have game speed alterations, and a host of visual options like arcade cab surrounds or CRT filters. There's also an online leaderboard for scores achieved only on 1 credit and without using any of the practice features. Now, I've been pretty positive so far, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Despite the scores leaping up into those giga numbers, I couldn't find too much strategy scoring beyond surviving and picking up as many medals as possible. Using Reflect racks points up even faster, but since there are a variety of reasons for using that mechanic and no real penalties or risks from it, playing for score doesn't feel hugely different from playing for survival. You may take some unnecessary risks going for a few extra medals, but there are so many falling you're usually in a good position to scoop them up anyway. I feel like it just needs a little something, even something simple like, say, point blanking enemies increasing the size of medals dropped to make it a bit more engaging. There's a bigger problem too, and this may well make or break the game for certain players. Put simply, Giga Wing is sluggish. If you've watched some of my other reviews, you may know I'm not remotely a stickler for this sort of thing, but in Giga Wing, input lag is very noticeable. Now, is it going to ruin the game for you? Well, honestly, that depends on you. For me, while I could definitely notice it, it didn't remotely prevent me from having a good time with the game, and for me, the reflect mechanic somewhat mitigates the problem. Since it needs that second long button press anyway, I don't think that bit of lag impacts this game quite as much as it would others. However, I do know some people really can't enjoy a game that feels laggy, and for those people, this version of Giga Wing really isn't going to be for you. Taking all things into consideration, I think I'd give Giga Wing an 8 out of 10. It's a game I personally absolutely love, and of the 15 shmups on the Capcom Arcade Stadium, it's the one I've taken the most immediate and strongest liking to, but it does have some pretty undeniable flaws. Whether you've played it on Switch or Dreamcast or even in the arcade, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. There's not a huge amount of information out there, which surprised me as I thought it was a pretty well-known title. Hopefully this Switch release will see it reaching a bigger audience. As ever, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.
Okay.